Okay, let's get started with our presentation today. So getting started with triggers, what we're going to talk about today is how you can start using triggers for QuickBase. And one of the first things you need to do is register in the Juiced cloud. In order to access our triggers portal, you have to be a registered user in our Juiced cloud. So we're going to talk about that. Once you're registered, we'll show you how to create a data connection. We'll go through a process to show you how to create a simple trigger. We'll take that same trigger and then we'll add some workflow to it. And then we'll create a third trigger, which will be what we call the scheduled trigger. And then we'll go through some questions and answers at the end. So with registering in the cloud, there are a few options. If you're a new customer to Juiced, meaning you haven't dealt with us before, you haven't had any add-ons with us, your process is a little simpler. So you'll just go to cloud.juicetech.com. You'll fill out the registration form on that page. You'll wait for an email that will come from our process that will basically let you continue with the registration. And once you're registered, you'll be able to log into the Juiced cloud. Here's a little screenshot of what that experience will look like. So you'll go to cloud.juicetech.com. You'll either click on the register in the upper right or the learn how. It'll take you to the registration form. So you fill out the form, enter all of your information, make sure you enter a valid QuickBase account URL, otherwise we won't register you properly. Click the register for access. Once you do that, an email should come shortly within no longer than a minute or so. And in that email, you'll have your cloud user ID, your temporary password. You click the login screen, it'll take you right to this login screen so you can enter that information. And once you log in successfully, you'll be able to access the cloud. So now if you're not a new customer to Juiced, meaning you have worked with us in the past, you have some add-ons with us, we categorize you guys in two forms, because some of you are already set up in the Juiced cloud, because some of you might have been in the beta program, or maybe some of you, we installed some add-ons for you internally and we updated you and inserted you into the cloud. So that's one category. The other category is clients that work with us that have not been set up in the Juiced cloud yet. So there's two different paths that we go through for these types of clients. If you're already in the cloud, meaning we set you up prior to this presentation, what we ask is that you either contact your client admin or an admin to invite you into the cloud from the cloud. Or if you don't know who your admin is, you can certainly contact us and then we can help you through the process. But either way, if we set you up or your client admin does, you'll get an email yourself asking you to register. So once you get that email and you click the register, you'll come to this form here, which you'll fill out this form. And then once you click the register button, you'll come to the Juiced Cloud login page. Now, if you're a client that has not yet been set up in our Juiced Cloud, you'll follow a similar process to new customers. So you'll go to cloud.juicetech.com or contact us. But we have to actually vet you and make sure that you are part of the company that you're trying to register for. So we'll actually validate your request, and then we'll send you an invite that looks similar to the page before. You'll get the email, you click on the register button, you'll come to this next form, you fill it out. When you click register, you'll come right into the Juiced Cloud login screen, enter your credentials, and log in. Now, once you are fully registered in the cloud and you want to visit the cloud again or log into the cloud, you'll go to cloud.juicetech.com. You'll click on the login screen. It'll take you to the login page, and that's how you're going to access the cloud from now on. Or you can just simply put this link here in one of your favorites. But if you're not sure, always go to cloud.juicetech.com and you'll see the login page. So once we're fully registered, you'll be able to create your own triggers. And what we're going to do in this presentation is show you how to create and get started with triggers. And one of the first things you need to do is create data connections, which really the data connections allow us to connect to your QuickBase account. And we have two ways to create data connections. One is using a user ID and password, meaning your QuickBase user ID and password. And the other option is to use user tokens. So we fully support user tokens. So you don't have to use user ID and password if you don't want. So if you create a user token for yourself, you can use that to set up your data connection. And one note we just wanted to point out, we do use AES encryption on our servers. So we do secure any credentials that are provided to us, so you should feel safe with that. So once I set up the data connection in the demo, what we're going to do is create a simple trigger. And a simple trigger is just going to depict when an event happens in QuickBase, like when a client is added to the clients table in my demo app. We're going to perform an action, and the action is going to be insert a record into the follow-ups table. Simple trigger. When something happens in QuickBase, we want something else to happen in QuickBase. After we show that one, we're going to create another trigger. We're going to duplicate that trigger, but we're going to add some workflow to that trigger. So we're going to do the same thing, meaning when a client is added to the clients table, we're going to insert a follow-up record to the follow-ups table. But what we want to do is we want to add an action ahead of the insert and say we want to search for a sales rep from our sales reps table for the region that the client is in. And then when we insert that follow-up record, we want to assign the sales rep that we found to the follow-up record. And then after we're done with that, we're going to add another action, which is going to go back and update our client record and set the region based on the sales rep that we found in our search action. So that'll be our second trigger with some workflow built in. And then we'll create one more trigger, which will be what we call a scheduled triggers. So instead of an event driving this trigger, meaning an action taking place in QuickBase, the event is going to be a schedule. So we're going to schedule a trigger to run at a specific time of the day. And unlike our normal triggers, a standard trigger, scheduled triggers are basically processed and based on a report that's in your QuickBase table. So in this case, I'll create a report in our clients table to identify the records that I want this scheduled trigger to process when it does run. And the way scheduled triggers work is for each record in the report, we will perform the same actions that we identified in the last trigger that we created. So basically, we're going to, for each record in the report, we'll search the sales rep to find the sales rep for the region of that client. We'll insert a follow-up record and assign the sales rep to that follow-up record. And then we'll come back and update the client record, and we'll update a checkbox field so we identify that we have, in fact, updated the client and set up the follow-up. So let's create some triggers.
So here's the application, the QuickBase application that I'm talking about. And you'll see that I have some basic tables, a client's table, a follow-ups table, sales rep table. None of these have data in them except for my sales rep and my regions table. So I basically have my regions in the United States, and I have some sales rep that are assigned to each region. So I'm assigned to Northeast, Todd to Northwest, and so on. And you'll notice that that's the only 4 tables that I have right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign into the cloud because I'm already pre-registered and I have an ID of John Smith and a password. So when I sign into the cloud, this is what I see. This is our dashboard. So it shows you all of the add-ons that we have at Juice Technologies and that we offer. And you'll see that in this case, Sample Company, Sample Inc. is which John Smith belongs to, is not really subscribed to any add-ons except for our Triggers add-on, and he's in trial status. And just to give you a quick, if you click on any one of these tiles, you'll see a little bit more information about the add-ons themselves. And if you click on the triggers, you'll see that triggers looks a little different because it shows you the different connections that we have and the different triggers that you might have that have already predefined. So if I go to my connection list, or I can go to my connection list through this link over here, or through the connections here. So I'm going to basically create 2 connections. My first connection, I'm going to choose, it's a QuickBase connection. And right now, we only do QuickBase to QuickBase. We don't use any other third-party service, but we will. And we just include these in the drop-downs, but they're not selectable, just to show you that we do plan on doing some other connections. But for now, all your connections are going to be QuickBase connections. We preload your account URL based on your registration and your user. And I'm going to create this one as with user ID and password. So webinar test UID password. So I'm going to enter my email address, my QuickBase, I'm sorry. This is where I should have been entering that. So that's my QuickBase user ID. This is going to be where I put my password. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm basically going to call it the webinar UID password connection. So now I click connect. It adds a new connection. It actually connects, and if for some reason the password was wrong or there was some problem with connections, you would have seen a red box on the bottom here, but that one worked fine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another connection too, but I'm going to create a connection with a user token this time. So I'm going to say, yes, I do have a user token. And really, when you want to get your user token, you can come back into your QuickBase application, go back into your preferences, and I already created the user token. I'm just going to copy and paste it out of here. And I assign this token to my application. And I'm going to call this one webinar test with user token. So now I connected, and it was a successful connection there as well. So that's how you establish your connections to QuickBase. So now the triggers product, or our product here, can connect to your QuickBase application. So the next thing we want to do is we want to go to our trigger list. So this shows us all the existing triggers that we currently have configured for our application, or applications, because you can create triggers for many applications. So I'm going to create a new trigger, and I'm going to create that trigger that we talked about in the slide deck. So the first thing you do is you choose a connection. So you can see now those connections are here. I had 2 previous, and I just added 2. So let's use our user ID and password connection. And I'm just going to give a little description here. Simple trigger to create a follow-up. I'm going to choose my application that this connection has access to. Here it is. I'm going to give it a name. Insert a follow-up. I'm going to choose my type of trigger, whether it's a scheduled or a standard trigger, and I'm going to choose standard. I'm also going to have to provide my application token. So again, come back into your application. And I'm assuming that everybody knows how to get your tokens and so on, even myself. Properties. Put that in the clipboard. So now once I do that, it's going to load my table list. So basically in this screen here, I'm saying, well, what table is going to create the trigger? What's going to fire the trigger? So really the trigger is going to be fired from my client's table. And I have a checkbox here that I can deactivate this trigger on errors. So if I'm getting errors, I can just have it turn off automatically, but I'm just going to leave that unchecked right now. So I'm going to save and next. So I created so what happens in QuickBase to fire the trigger? So the next thing is I want to create the action. So what do I want to happen when the trigger is fired? So I'm going to add an action, and I'm going to add an insert action. So now it's really what do you want to take place in QuickBase? So it preloads the data connection from the original screen, and it says, well, what do you want to do? I want to add a record in QuickBase. And I'm just going to give it a name, so I'm going to say insert follow-up. I can put a detailed description here if I want as well. I'm going to enter my token, and it's still in my cache, so I got it there. And now I'm going to choose the application again, because I could be adding a record into another application in another table, but in this case I'm not. So I'm going to choose that same application. And then it's asking me, well, what table do you want to insert the record into? Follow-ups. So that's my first piece. Now that I defined what table I want to insert a record to, and I have to do some field mapping. So basically I'm saying, well, what fields do I want to update or add data into in my follow-ups table? So here's my follow-ups table, and I'm basically going to click Add Fields. Now one of the things I like to do is I like to go back to the application and just go to my Add Follow-ups, so I know what data I need to add. So I know I'm going to add a company, an action, a notes, and a source. So I come in here and I'm going to choose from my add fields an action to be taken. And if you notice, that's a multi-list dropdown. So it pulls the values that are in QuickBase for you. So I'm going to say this is going to be a new action, and I'm going to add another field. And now I want to make sure that I connect it to the proper client. So I'm going to say we're the related client. Now, if you'll notice over here, we have some fields available to us. Application data, which is standard user ID information or company information, or the data from the clients field that triggered this or fired this trigger. So basically, I want to take the record ID from the clients table and I want to match it off to my related client and my follow-ups. So I'm just going to drag and drop that over. So I got an action, my related client. I want to also update the notes field. And that one's a static text. I want to just so I know that the trigger created this follow-up. And then one more field, I'm going to do the source field. And I'm going to set the source to equal, again, this was another drop-down multi-choice field. I'm going to choose trigger. Okay, so I defined how I want to map the data into my follow-ups table. So now I'm going to hit save. So my trigger is set up to define, it has one action, which is going to insert a follow-up record into my follow-ups table. So I'm going to click on my next tab, which is the test trigger. Now, because I don't have a client in there, I'm not going to actually test the trigger. I'm going to test it in the next one. So I'm going to continue on to the Finish tab. When I go to the Finish tab, maybe I want to log the activities in tables in my QuickBase application, but I don't have any tables in my QuickBase application to do that with. So I'm actually going to ask the triggers to create those tables for me. So when I do that right now, it might take a couple of seconds here, but it's actually creating two tables in my application right now. It's creating a trigger activities table and a trigger details table. So I go back to my application, I refresh. You see those two tables were created. And now I just need to assign them here. I'm going to say, all right, I want my triggers table to be my trigger activities and my details table to be my details. Over here, you can send an email to yourself only when triggers error or on every activity. And I'm going to choose every activity. And I'm going to enter my email address in there. And you can put additional email addresses in there as well, separated by commas. Now the next thing is we want to be able to fire this trigger, and the way to do it is going to be via an email notification. Now if you click this button here, it shows you exactly how you should configure that email notification. If I blow this up a little bit. It basically tells you to create an email notification in the clients table, and it's going to tell you what type of email notification to create. You can name it however you want. You need to notify this email address right here. And then you can filter your own criteria however you want to fire it. And you're going to create it as a custom message, and you can put a subject of QB trigger request. And this is the next important piece that has to be put in the message body. So basically the two real important pieces here are the email address you're sending the message to and the message body itself. Now, I can also send that to me in an email. So I'm going to blow this back down. Reset. Sorry. I can enter my email address here, and I can have that notification sent to me. It's going to be the same information, so you can copy and paste. So what I want to do, though, is I want to create an email notification. I'm just going to copy this right here. And I'm going to go into my webinar app. I'm going to go into my clients table. I'm going to create a new email notification. And like the email or that screen said, I want to create an open email. I'm going to send it to, I'm just going to go back and get the email address, copy and paste the email address. I want this trigger to fire when a record's added in the clients table. I'm going to build a custom message and just say, should be trigger request is fine. I'm going to go back to get my message. Set the message there. And one of the important pieces here is this really relates to the trigger ID in our portal. This tells us who you are, that you want to action a trigger, send the record ID in, or override the key value, and it's a trigger. So basically, the only thing that really is changing trigger to trigger is this ID for each client. Now, if you can also do multi-record version, and I'm going to show you that in the next trigger. But that's all I need to do here, and all I got to do is save this. And now that one's active. So, and I spelled follow-up wrong, but basically this email notification is going to be sent to our triggers process whenever a client is added into the clients table. So if I exit here, I'm going to go back to triggers right now, and I'm just going to close this, and I'm going to save and finish here. So now you see that this new trigger ID 944, insert a follow-up, is sitting here and it's in active status. So I'm going to actually go and execute it. So I'm going to go back to my application. I'm going to add a new client. It's my client name, and I'm going to say he's from Idaho. So right now that email notification should have been fired to our trigger process, and our trigger process is going to insert a follow-up record into the follow-ups table. So I'm just going to refresh the screen and see if that took place yet. So as you can see, there's a record in here. I'm going to click on the follow-ups table here. You can see more. So it inserted a new record into a follow-ups table. You can see the notes field has the value that I entered there. The source has trigger. And you'll notice that it's not assigned to anybody because I didn't do that in this trigger, because this was a simple trigger. Add a new client, add a record into follow-ups. And that's all that this trigger will do. Okay. So now, though, what I want to do is I want to do that second trigger where I'm going to add a little workflow to this trigger. So I'm back into my triggers portal. Here's my 944 trigger, and I'm going to duplicate it. Now, when you duplicate a trigger, you have two options. You can either copy the trigger and change it to make it its own trigger, or you can copy the trigger in sandbox mode. And what that means is it'll make a duplicate copy of it, but it's really attached to the original trigger so that you can make changes, and when you're done, you can apply those changes to the trigger it was copied from. And the benefit there too is that your live trigger will still run. It doesn't get disabled, so it'll run as is while you're making your changes to the sandbox and testing your sandbox. And once you're done, you can apply your sandbox changes to the live one, and it'll run with the new changes. But in this case, I'm just going to copy this trigger. And you can see that it has a new trigger ID and a new name, but also notice that it copied in an inactive mode, and that's important to note. So right now this one won't run at all. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit it. I'm going to give it a new name. Insert follow-up with sales rep, because what I want to do is I want to assign the sales rep to that follow-up record. I'm going to change the description here too. And you notice it copied the table, the application that's associated with it, copied the app token. So everything else there is fine. So I'm going to update it next. And here's that. The original action was I'm going to insert a follow-up. So I'm going to add a new action. And really what I want to do is I want to add a search action. And basically what it's asking is, well, what do you want to do? I want to search. And I'm going to say, give it a name, find sales rep. I'm going to choose my application. And it's asking me, well, what table do you want to search? I want to search my sales reps table. Okay. So now I go to fields to map. It says, well, okay, I'm going to define now, how do I want to search that table? So basically I want to say from the sales reps table, I want to find where the coverage area contains, and if you notice I have fields now I can use from the clients table. I want to grab the state region. So basically what I want to do is I want to find the sales rep where that sales rep's coverage area has the state or region of the client that I just added. Now, what I want to do here is, now that I filtered my data in the sales rep, I want to figure out what fields I want to bring back. So I basically want to bring back the user field because that's where my sales rep's ID is stored. And you know what? I'm going to bring back another field as well. I'm going to bring back the state region. Not related region. Region name. Okay, so I defined how do I want to get the sales rep data, and then what data do I want to bring back from the sales reps table. This because I want to use this data in my next action. So I'm going to save this. So I have two actions here, but if you notice, I want to do the find before I do the insert. And then I want to update the insert to use some of the data in the find. So that's what this little icon here means, is you can move these around. So I'm going to reorder this. So now my first action is going to be find sales rep. My second action is insert a follow-up, but I'm going to edit that one because I don't want to take advantage of the sales rep field that I have. So I'm going to go back into my fields to map. I'm going to just take a look at the fields I already have mapped, and I'm going to add a field. I'm going to scroll down. So I basically want the assigned to on the follow-ups table to be assigned to the sales rep I just found. And if you notice now, this changed. I not only have the client fields available to me, I also have the fields that I returned from my search. So I basically want to take that user field and bring it into my assigned to. I'm not going to use this one just yet. So now I update this. So now I have a trigger with two actions. Let's go back to the trigger list because I want to make sure I activate it. And you know what? I'm going to deactivate that one. So now what I want to do is, how do I fire? Actually, I want to show you a test on this one. I'm going to go back into this one. I'm going to go to the test trigger tab. And instead of firing it from QuickBase right now, I'm going to go back to my original client record. It has an ID of 145. So let's give this one a test in the cloud. So if I enter a record ID of 145, as if this one just was added, and I say I want to test this without database updates. So if I do test trigger, what's happening is we're sending the message to our trigger process, and we're saying we'll go run as if we're going to update the database with record ID 145 from the client's table. And if you click on the view activities, you'll see that that activity was sent and it was processed in a test mode. And if you click it, it opens up a window and tells you, well, okay, well, the first thing it did was it found a sales rep, and it did find one, and it would insert a record into the follow-ups table. Okay, so this is a good way for you to check before you actually process your trigger what's going to happen. You can also do a test with database updates. So if I do this again, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to send a message to our trigger process, but this time, if I go to the follow-ups table, you can see it added a new follow-up, but the difference between this follow-up and the first one is it actually assigned Todd to that follow-up because Todd was responsible for the Northwest region. If I go to my sales reps tab, you see Todd was responsible for Idaho. So that's our simple trigger, and then our trigger with some workflow there. Okay, but now what I want to do is, and one thing, I want to add another action to that trigger. So I'm going to go back into my triggers portal. And actually, I didn't set up the email notification yet, but I'm going to simply do it this way. I know that the trigger ID is 945. So I'm basically going to come back into my app, and instead of creating a brand new notification in my clients table, I'm just going to duplicate that one I just had. So this is the one. I'm going to copy it. Give it a different name, and all I'm really going to do is change this to be 945. And it's still going to run, it's going to run the 945 trigger instead of the 944. So if we come into clients now and add a new client, And let's choose North Dakota. Okay, so right now it's sending a message to our trigger process to go grab trigger number 945 and go insert some follow-ups. So let's see if it worked yet. Let's go to my follow-ups table. Okay, so there you can see that it inserted a new follow-up record for tests with sales rep, and it assigned Rozzy because Rozzy was assigned to the Midwest region for North Dakota. Now, one of the other things I did not do, I'm going to come back into that trigger. I'm going to add another action. Because remember, I selected the sales rep region, but I want to update the client record and assign that region to the client record. So I'm going to add another action. I'm going to do an update action. Same application. I want to update the clients table. Oops. And now I'm going to say, well, what client do I want to update? So I want to update where the record ID of my client is equal to the record ID of the client that fired this trigger. Okay, so this is the record that I want to update. And then now I'm going to define, well, what field do I want to update? So I want to update the region field, and the value that I want to use is going to come from my search. And that's it. So I just added a third action to that trigger, which to update my client region. Let's go back into our application. Let's add a new client. Test with region. Let's just choose another state here. Let's choose Pennsylvania. Now you see the region field doesn't have a value in it, and obviously we don't have a follow-ups yet. So basically we're kicking off that trigger to execute. I'll go back into my follow-ups table just to see. Okay, so the follow-up was added for Pennsylvania. It assigned me because I'm associated to the Northeast region. But let's go back into that client record. We can see that it updated the field region to be Northeast as well. So in this case, we found the proper sales rep, we inserted the follow-up, and then we came back and updated the client record. So that's our second trigger. Okay. So now let's create a scheduled trigger. And in a scheduled trigger, it's a little bit more advanced, and it's a lot different because the way the scheduled trigger is going to be fired is going to be from a report. So what I did was, in this scenario, I want to insert another follow-up record, but I want to do it 2 weeks from the day it was originally created. So I have a field in my table called next follow-up date. And I actually have that as a formula field 2 weeks from create date. And I created a report. And you know, I'm just pretending here we're 2 weeks out. So you know, normally you would say, well, where the record's next follow-up date is equal to today. But in this case, I'm saying, well, let's grab all of the records where the next follow-up date is 2 weeks from today. So it's the 28th. So these 3 records are the ones that I identify that I want to send next follow-ups. And again, you can filter this report however you want. And this report here is really going to drive a scheduled trigger. So when I go back to my scheduled triggers, actually my trigger portal, I'm going to come back into scheduled triggers over here. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a schedule. So I said I wanted this to run daily at 9 p.m. And I already have a schedule in there for another trigger, but I'm going to create a brand new schedule. And I'm going to call it daily at 9 p.m. And again, you can do a one-time schedule, you can do a weekly schedule, you can do a monthly schedule, But in this case, I'm going to keep it simple and just do a daily schedule. And these fields here let you future date it. So let's say you don't want this to start running every day until next week. But in this case, I'm just going to say I want it to run today. And this is the effective date too. You can also use this little timer here to say, well, I want it to start running on the 14th, but don't start running it until 9 p.m. But again, you're going to choose the actual execution time over here. So here's the execution time. So a daily at 9 p.m. I don't want it, I'm going to let it start today. So the first time it would run would be tonight. So I'm going to save that schedule. So now that I have a new schedule, I want to create a trigger for that schedule. So I can either do it by creating a trigger here, or I can go back to my trigger list and create a schedule for my trigger list. So I'm going to create a trigger for my trigger list. So let's use the user token one this time. So right now it's just connecting the QuickBase with the user token to be able to populate the application list as well as the table list. Okay. So 1 second here. I'm just going to give it a description, what application I'm going to run it against. Again, this application list is driven based on the connection that I chose. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to choose the schedule trigger type. Again, provide my token. I'll actually put them up in here. Just want to make sure I didn't screw that up. Sorry. Two C's. So basically what I'm going to do is create the same trigger that I did before. And you can't, one thing is you can't copy an existing trigger and make it a scheduled trigger. And the reason for that is because our scheduled triggers are driven by reports, not by data in the separate tables. So that's why you can't duplicate an existing trigger and make it a scheduled trigger. So I basically have to recreate it. But again, it's going to be driven off of the client's table. And now you're going to see that there's a list of reports you can choose. And I have a report, again, the next follow-up date report is the one that I'm going to use to drive this trigger. So when this trigger runs, it's going to read this report from the client's table, and it's going to process all the records. And we have some other checkboxes here, process records within the limit. So we have limits set to these, so you can only run 200 records at a time. And if you had a report that had 400 records and you wanted to process within the limit, it would process 200, and then you can run it again. And you can stop processing on errors, and you can deactivate a trigger on errors just like before. So this is the first step. So I'm going to save and next. Now I'm going to choose the schedule I want to run. Daily at 9. Okay. Save. And that's the only difference really. The trigger itself, the configuration is going to be very similar. The only difference was I said I want to choose it from a report and I want to schedule it. So now I'm going to create my first action, which is going to search, find rep, token, so I'm basically going through, I'm doing the same thing I did before. I want to find my sales rep. So again, I want to say, well, where the coverage area contains, but in this case, I don't have my clients table here because it's being driven by the report. So now, obviously, I'm going to have to make sure any field I want to use in my filtering is available in that report. So if you didn't select the proper fields in the report, you need to make sure that you reselect them and come back in here. So right now, I have my state region field here. So I'm going to say where my region coverage area is equal to my state region from the report. That's how I'm going to get my sales rep. Again, I'm going to pull in my two fields. my user field, and I want to bring back my region name field. So again, this action was to find the sales rep by the region and bring back the user and the region name. And I'm going to save this. Action number 2 is going to add a record. Into the follow-up table. And again, I'm going to map my fields from the report. So I'm going to say action taken, new, related client. Now this time again, I got to find the related client from my report, which is my record ID. Add another field. Action taken, assigned to. That I want to find from my search user field. Add another field. My notes field, I'm going to type in from scheduled trigger. I'm going to choose my source this time as scheduled trigger. So I got I got my action taken, my related client, my assigned to, my notes field, and my source field. So that's the fields I'm going to add, connect to when I'm adding my record into my follow-ups table. I'm going to save that. I'm going to add one more action. Update. I'm going to update that region field again on the client table this time. So on my clients table, I got to find the client that I want to update. So where the record ID of the client table is equal to the record ID from the report that is driving this trigger. And then what fields do I want to update? I want to update that region field. And I want to set it equal to the value from my search. Save. Okay, same actions as I did in the other trigger. So in test trigger, I'm not going to test this one, but I can. It primes the report, and if I do test it, it'll process it with the first record. But the real way I want to test is I want to actually come to my finish. I'm going to insert my activity tables. So it's my activities table and my activities detail. I'm going to send myself activity emails and save and finish. Now so I have a scheduled trigger, and you can see scheduled triggers are denoted by a little calendar here, but you can also get to them from a scheduled trigger list over here. So this is the trigger I just set up, and it's going to run daily at 9 o'clock. But if I want to see it run right now, I don't want to wait till 9 o'clock. I'm just going to click this Execute Now button. So this Execute Now is going to take us to this report for these 3 clients. It's going to add 3 new follow-up records for each one and come back and update each one of these. Oh, but actually, you know what? I want to update this field. That's one thing I didn't do. So I'm going to go back in and edit this trigger. Come to my actions, to my update action. Because the region's already updated, I want to update that checkbox field and set it equal to yes, that it was updated. Future follow-up created, value of 1, because it's a checkbox. Okay. Good. I'm going to go back to my scheduled trigger list. And I'm actually going to run this scheduled trigger right now. So execute on demand. Again, it just makes it confirm. If you don't want to run it, then don't. But if you do, you click yes. It sends that message to our queue, so our trigger process is receiving that message, and now it's going to actually read that report, and it's going to process those follow-ups. So it actually did them already. So there you go. You got 3 scheduled follow-ups that were added, assigned to the appropriate sales reps. And now if we go back to the clients table, we should see that each one was also checked off, that the future follow-up was created. And again, that's just a simple checkbox. It's not a formula checkbox because I wanted to actually check it. So that's our scheduled triggers. So now, one thing I didn't show is activities. So you can view the activities right from any one of the triggers, from either the trigger list or the scheduled trigger list, either one. So if you click on the activities for a trigger, you'll see all of the activities that took place, and you can see what actually happened. And the nice thing too is if you wanted to see, okay, well, this record was added at this time, you can click on this link. It takes you right to that record in QuickBase that was added, and you can see the details of that record. Or you can reprocess the trigger. So if you click this button here, what it's going to do is it's going to send the same parameter list right to our trigger process and process that trigger again. Let's say somebody went in here and deleted this follow-up record, and you want to just add it again. You didn't want to manually do it. You come in here and click the reprocess, and it'll take care of it for you. And also in the app too, I didn't show you the activity tables. So not only are the activities stored in our cloud, they're also stored in your application. So you can create as many reports as you want from these activities, and you don't have to have everybody have access to the cloud to come here to click the activities. You can actually do that from your QuickBase application itself. Okay, so I know it was a lot to go through here. Let me jump back in. Let me swap this. So one thing I just wanted to point out is, again, I mentioned some limits before. We have some global limits. We didn't go through multi-record processing. Just in the sake of time here, I didn't go through that, but I'll probably hit that in the next webinar. But you can only process 200 records at a time. And that's really just to try to keep control over the updates that are going on and so on. So the global limits such as multi-record processing. So that means if you do a grid edit or if you do an import, we'll process, the trigger can fire multiple times from that type of a transaction. And our scheduled trigger limit, again, is 200 records. So it's based on the number of records in the report. So you can be crafty in that, and you can filter your report a certain way, and then you can run it multiple times to circumvent some of that. But in one transaction, we want to keep it to these limits for now. We do have some client-specific limits, which are really what we call action result limits. And what that means is if you're searching through a table, we'll only allow you to bring back 100 records during that search. If you're updating in an update action, you can only update 100 records in one update action, as well as delete. Just to give you an idea of some of the limitations that we have. So you're probably wondering about pricing. So like all of our add-ons, we charge a monthly hosting fee for triggers, and that's $40 a month. It includes 3,000 transactions per month. If you want to do some advanced processing, which means multi-record processing, like changes via grid edit or by import, and you want to also do scheduled triggers, it's another $20 a month to the 40. And if you want to exceed the 3,000 transactions per month, you can do that. We just charge another $20 per 2,500 transactions. So what we want to do is, we covered a lot in this webinar. We want to do another webinar. We're scheduling it tentatively for the week of July 10th, where we'll go through conditional actions, search and repeat or looping actions, and any suggestions that we get from this webinar here. Right away, we'll put in multi-record transactions as well. And what I want to do is kind of go back to here. I'm sure there were some questions along the way. And right now, if there's anybody who has a question, if you want to click the raise your hand, we can kind of get your question answered that way. I'll open up the mic. Actually, I can open it right now if anybody wants to. Hold on one second. Let me just go to the attendees. I don't know if I can unmute. Just see. I'm going to actually, all of the questions that were posted through, I'm going to kind of go through them and send them out to everybody after I answer them all. There were a bunch of questions. Let me see. One question was, can you run a schedule at 9:10? Right now, all the schedules are going to be on the hour. We probably open that up later on, but for now, at the beginning, it's going to be on the hour. Will it handle a report that has null results? Yes, it will, because it basically won't do anything, because it's not going to have any records to process. Are the limits on email notifications? From our standpoint, no. QuickBase has its own limits that I'm not really sure what they are. They're kind of, I don't know if they're a little fuzzy in terms of how many emails can be sent out. I think they do say by user, but we use email notifications extensively throughout all of our add-ons, and we haven't run into any issues with limits on that. Will updates work if the key ID is not the record ID field? Yes, it will. And that's one of the things that in the message that you send in the email notification, there is a key field value. So if you use a field other than the record ID as your key, you just want to include that field in the key field value when you're designing your trigger message. Can a trigger be created to create a sales activity record for the sales rep? Can a trigger? Yes, a trigger can be created to create a sales rep, an activity for a sales rep, yes. For multiple records, do you just use repeat on and repeat off? Absolutely. Good point. So when you do create that email notification in the multi-record process, you copy the same message and you just put repeat on and repeat off. So, and that's part of the message that we provide you in the email or in the pop-up window that you saw. We actually tell you to do that when you're creating your multi-record process email notification. That's what you do. Would there be a monthly fee for each app? No, not for each app. Or for the realm? Yes, because we treat you as a different client. And that's true with all of our add-ons. Somebody asked, has it been used for a while? Actually, we've been using it internally and for some beta clients for probably 6 months or so. So, and I have to give a shout out to Don Larson from MCF. And he did a great job in helping us really vet out a lot of the functionality and debug a lot of it. So, but we have been using, we use it ourselves. So yes, it is, we consider it pretty robust here, and we're looking obviously to get a lot more customers on it to help us make it even better. One question is, QuickBase Actions came about. So what really is, where's the differences between them? And I think you probably saw that with the trigger that I created with the workflow, because with QuickBase Actions you can't do a search, or you can't chain a bunch of actions together. So we're not saying this is a replacement to QuickBase Actions. QuickBase Actions is great, and it gets a lot of very simple updates done. What this does is it kind of works in tandem with it, and it really enhances the QuickBase Action process. And again, I'm actually going to, all these questions, I'm going to make sure I put them all in the email that goes out to everybody. Can a trigger be created to create multiple EFP documents for multiple records? You need to be using our exact forms plus batch processor. The answer is yes, it can, but you have to be subscribed to our exact forms batch processor to do so. So basically when that update takes place, if you update an indicator, you can then fire exact forms batch processor to run a bunch of documents or generate a bunch of documents. And I think that's it. So thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it. If there's any other questions, you can certainly contact us offline. We look forward to getting a bunch of you guys using triggers. Again, go to cloud.juicetech.com. You can email us at info@juicetech.com, or you can call us at the number you see on the screen. I appreciate your attention, and I look forward to the next webinar. Thank you.